Hello, this is Mr. Kashmir. Welcome to the Innovative Literacy Lecture on Summarizing. Let's get started. So let's start with the purpose of summarizing. The purpose of summarizing is very simple. It is to restate the main ideas of a story, an essay, an article, etc., in order to display your understanding or aid the understanding of another. Okay? So again, the reason we summarize is what we're doing, our purpose, is to restate the main ideas in order to display and aid in understanding. When we restate the main ideas, we recreate the argument written in an essay or an article, or we retell in brief the story told in a short story or a novel. And by doing so, we assist ourselves in our own understanding. By displaying our understanding, we clarify our own thought and make it more specific, and we can help others understand as well. So the purpose of summarizing is to restate the main ideas of what you read in order to display and or aid understanding. The method. How do you summarize? Well, it's also fairly straightforward. The method for summarizing is, number one, you annotate. Number two, you pick the most important annotations. In other words, you pick out the most important things that you've picked up on, the main ideas, the thesis statements, the headings of the various sections, the key points. Not all the little things that you thought were interesting, not all the words that you circled because you didn't know what they meant, just the most important things. So number one, you annotate. Number two, you pick out the most important annotations. And then number three, you synthesize those most important annotations into a clear, concise, and well thought out summary. So that's how you summarize. You annotate, you pick out your most important annotations, and you take those things and you synthesize them. That means you put them together into a single solitary summary. Summarizing is about restating the most important main ideas in a concise and straightforward manner. Summarizing is not about opinion, it's not about what you found interesting, it's not about how it relates to your life, it's just literally, here is what I read, and by showing you what I read, I show that I understand it, I enforce my own understanding, and I help you understand. So you annotate, you pick the most important annotations, and then you synthesize them. I'm going to roll through an example here of what it is that I'm talking about when I'm talking about annotation. Okay? And in order to do that, what I have is actually the Rolling Stone article on global warming. And what I've done is I've taken photos of the article. And the photos that I've taken show I've already read the article, I've already annotated it. And in order to make it easier for you to understand, what I've done is I've actually just gone through and put only my most important annotations here. Because you've already read the article, I'm not going to do a lot of restating and re-walking you through. You know this article, we've worked on it in class. So here's what I want you to see. On the first page, the very first paragraph, always important to look at how the author starts out. And in this case, the author starts out by showing some data that explains the severity of the problem. This is one of my very first annotations, and it's one of my most important, okay? So what I've done here is I've gone back through and I've shown only my most important annotations on the pages, and I'm going to walk you through those most important annotations. That's what I'm going to do. So the first one is that he shows the data showing how severe global warming has become. The second one that was really important is that he takes us to Copenhagen and he shows us this first number, 2 degrees Celsius. Notice I can use the headings to guide my thought. Obviously, if he puts a heading here, it's an important thought. And so what is the thought? Well, it's that 2 degrees is the maximum that we are allowed to increase the global temperature in order to remain safe. So now I have my first 2 most important thoughts. Number 1, the severity of the problem, and number 2, that 2 degrees is the maximum increase. That's 1. That's 2. Okay, moving forward here, my next 2 most important thoughts are guided again by the author's headings. The next heading is the second number, 565 gigatons, and it's the next most important point. 565 more gigatons is the amount of carbon dioxide we can burn into the atmosphere by mid-century and still have some reasonable hope of staying below 2 degrees. Okay, so here's my annotation. 2012, that's where we are now, plus another 565 gigatons of CO2 means that we'll rise 2 degrees in temperature. That is a key point. My next key point is his next heading. The third number, 2,795 gigatons, as you'll remember, is what we are currently planning to burn. That's the amount we have in reserve, and it's 5 times too much. So, point 3, the 565 gigatons is the safe amount to burn. Point 4, the 2,795 gigatons is what we're planning to burn, and it's 5 times too much. I'm halfway through the article, and I only have 4 points now. Remember, what I've done is I've pulled out for you only my most important annotations. How do I know they're the most important? Well, it helps that they're in the headings, but even if they weren't, I know they're the most important because they're the things that the article wouldn't be the same without. He calls it Global Warming's Terrifying New Math. That's the name of the article. It's all about the math in this article. He takes us through these 3 numbers and he says, these 3 numbers will show you how serious the problem is. So when I summarize, I'm going to show the 3 numbers. Moving on to the final pages. So here we are, last 2 pages, guys, and so here's what I've got to show you. My last 2 major annotations. Remember, I'm showing you only the most important annotations. I actually went through the article and just made the most important annotations to make this lecture easier on you. So here are the last 2 most important annotations. After presenting the math and after presenting the 3, the 3 figures, the 2 degrees, the 565 gigatons, and the 2,795 gigatons, McKibben isn't done yet. Okay, he has 2 more major points he makes. And you know he has 2 major points because of these big S's on the last couple of pages. They're kind of like their own mini headings. Look for stuff like that. It's there to help you. It's there to guide you. It's actually there to help the reader make sense of the article as you read, and it visually breaks it up. When you see something like this, pay attention. There's a new big idea coming. Every single time, guys. Every single time. So check it out. The big idea here is environmental efforts to tackle global warming have failed. And then he actually goes into a bunch of different examples of what won't work. Okay? He talks about the record of failure means we know a lot about the strategies that don't work. In other words, we've been combating global warming for a while now, and guess what? We haven't fixed it. So at the very least, we know what not to do. He talks about how green groups haven't worked, how it's like we're trying to start a movement against ourselves. On the next pages, he also talks about how government and politics haven't gotten the job done either because they have conflicting interests. So, big idea, we know a whole lot about what won't work. Okay? And final big idea. This is the last one. Okay? Again, note the big S. That's there to help you as a reader. So he says, the paths we've tried to tackle global warming have so far produced only gradual halting shifts, aka nothing we've done has worked so far. A rapid transformative change would require building a movement, and movements require enemies, and he then says the enemy should be the fossil fuel industry. So actually, if you look at my old annotations here, you see that I've got circled a movement, needs an enemy, The enemy is the fossil fuel industry. So what McKibben goes on to argue is that we need moral outrage. We need an actual moral movement in the same vein as something like the civil rights movement. And movements need enemies, and the enemy should be the fossil fuel industry. Why? Because they're the ones that have all that oil underneath the ground that they're trying to bring to the surface and burn into the atmosphere, right? So, point 5, what won't work? Point 6, we need an enemy, and it should be the fossil fuel industry. I've taken this lengthy article. If you remember, which I'm sure you do, this is a 10-page article. I've broken it down into the 6 most important points. How have I done that? By looking for things like headings, and by looking for things like what is the title telling me he's trying to do, and by looking for the key pieces of his argument. Now, all that's left to do, remember, I annotated. I went through and found the most important annotations. Those are steps 1 and 2. And step 3 is to synthesize. So what I'm going to do is I'm literally just going to take those 6 key points and I'm going to put them all together into a summary. So let's see how the result looks. Final slide coming up. Ladies and gentlemen, here it is. What I've done, and what you should be able to read pretty clearly, is that I've quite literally taken all of my biggest ideas, my 6 main annotations, and I've put them together in a clear, concise, well-worded, well-thought-out summary. In Global Warming's Terrifying New Math, Bill McKibben presents the latest figures that show the depth of the climate crisis facing our planet. He begins by citing some recent figures that show, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the Earth is warming at an alarming rate and that the environmental effects are already devastating. After establishing the immediacy of the crisis, McKibben presents 3 figures. The first is 2 degrees Celsius, which is the number of degrees agreed upon by 187 countries in an international conference in Copenhagen as being the maximum safe global temperature increase for our planet. The second number is 565 gigatons, which is the amount of carbon dioxide, CO2, we can burn before raising the global temperature by 2 degrees. The third figure, the scariest of all, is 2,795 gigatons, which is the amount of CO2 we already have in reserve, ready to be burned. This is 5 times the amount that the international community agreed is safe to burn. After presenting the dire crisis in stark mathematical terms, McKibben explores methods of action against climate change that have proved unsuccessful, including personal conservation efforts and politics, and suggests instead a massive moral movement against the fossil fuel industry, the enemy, in McKibben's view, that is intent on burning 5 times the safe amount of CO2 and leaving the planet to burn. So check this out. First sentence, I state the topic. Second sentence, I state my first annotation. Here's my second annotation. Here's my third annotation. Here's my fourth annotation. Here's my fifth annotation. And here is my 6th annotation. And just like that, guys, I've got a beautifully written summary. What did I do? I restated the main ideas in order to aid and display understanding. I annotated the article. I determined the most important annotations using the article as a guide and using its headings as a guide. I took my most important annotations and I synthesized them, meaning I put them together in one single place, and I wrote it well and clearly and concisely. You guys are going to be able to do this level of summarizing before the year is out. And that's the end of the lecture.